Hi, everyone. I am Catherine Lang-Cline, and I am president of Portfolio Creative. And this is the secret art of business, where we talk to people about using their whole brain to have success in business. And my guest today, I'm very excited to have Jeremy Slagle here, one of my most favorite people in the creative community. And we used to be neighbors a long time ago, business-wise, and then we kind of went on and did our own thing. And we're still here, like, 18 years later, and it's all been really good. So hopefully, I mean, this is going to show everyone that this is a great example of how, if you use your whole brain, you too will, if not be super successful, you will be pretty darn happy, though. I mean, I think we can at least go that far.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Jeremy, I want you to talk a little bit about Slagle Design first. I mean, I can definitely go on and on about it, but I want to make sure people understand what you're doing. And I will put contact information if people want to get a hold of you too. So
Awesome.
tell us a story of Slagle Design, please.
Well, yeah, so Slagle Design, you're pretty much seeing it. I pretty much work by myself. I do have two unbelievably creative kids who has graduated from college and is now working for a design firm locally, and he sometimes works off-site, sometimes works on-site. Today I have the privilege of having him on-site sitting behind me. You can see the top of his hat there. That's Caleb. And then I have a daughter who's studying graphic design right now in college, and our model is that they kind of intern with me for 2 years while they go to college for 2 years, and then they go get a job, and it's worked well for my crash test dummy behind me. So I'm assuming it'll work just great for her. I have been in business as Slagle Design for about 13 or 14 years now. Started in 2009, and it's been awesome. I co-founded and ran an agency 13 years prior to that, and that's when Catherine and I were neighbors, and that business was called Element. And we had all sorts of fun, grew a small studio, and it was time for that to go away, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it. And when that happened, I just really wanted to get back to working with small businesses, startups, and even medium-sized, like multi-generational, family-owned business type companies that have been around for a little bit, and it's time to really take it to the next level. So cut my overhead way down, and so now I basically work from home. This is my studio here at home, and yeah, that's me. So I do graphic design. Branding is mostly what I do, brand identity, and then whatever, if it's a food company, then it's packaging, and then working on their website and such, and then I also do a lot of illustration work as well. So
yeah, and even then, just hearing you say that, all very impressive, but still very humble. We'll dig into that a little more. But I wanted to start also with what did you do as a kid that, for example, almost led you to believe you were going to do something, creative, or maybe it wasn't creative, but, what was the thing that kind of got you all charged up as a kid that you just loved doing?
Boy, I used to draw every opportunity I had. I mean, I always had a sketchbook with me. I always had a pencil or a pack of crayons with me. When I was little, like a lot of kids, I was terrified of getting shots at the doctor. And my mom would bring my pack of Crayola markers with me, and there was that piece of big butcher paper that the doctor always pulls across.
Yes.
So I would just sit there like it was a big mural, and I would just draw and color. And meanwhile, the doctor's poking me here, giving me shots here. So when I'm in the zone, when it comes to creativity, that's the world I live in. And so if you saw me as a kid, whether I was sitting in church on a Sunday morning, or I was sitting at one of my dad's basketball games, he was a coach, I was spending a lot more time drawing and sketching than doing just about anything else. And my mom, who has some artistic flair to her and interest, she just was, both my parents were super encouraging, but I had a stay-at-home mom, and she used to bring home awesome books from the library, and one of them was by a guy named Ed Emberley, and he did a whole series of books for children. And it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago that I realized, oh my gosh, the style that Ed Emberley taught me to draw in his books when I was little is probably the biggest influence on the way that I approach illustration and design today. So yeah, if you're out there and you've got kids and you want to encourage them to draw, I highly recommend, I know Columbus Metropolitan Library, a lot of them have it. His books are awesome. They're so great. I actually had an opportunity to call him out of the blue a couple years ago. Spent 45 minutes on the phone with him. He's 90 years old now.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, and it was so cool. And actually, he said, like, I kind of shared my story with him. Like, I was not good at anything besides creativity. Like, I was barely passing classes in school, but man, I'd go into the art classroom and it was just like my fortress of solitude. And so for me, it was very clear what I was going to do with my career path at some point. I wasn't sure what graphic design was yet, or that you could make, anything I knew being young was like fine artist and like painting paintings and putting them in a museum or putting them in a gallery and hoping to sell some. So graphic design really resonated with me because you can actually like make money doing it and you can be creative at the same time. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important message too, because growing up as well, when I told my mom that I wanted to be an artist, I mean, I think the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of parents is always, "Oh my God, you're going to starve," sort of thing.
Right.
So
right.
I think there's a great message in what you have just described there on how, you can actually not only make money at this, but if you see this in your children, really, really encourage it. And it also comes in handy later, which is kind of the point of this podcast too. Is like don't neglect that side of your brain that is creative, because it's going to really help you in business, in the long run too. All right. So you are an artist as a child. So how did you get there from here? Or how'd you get here from there? Whatever it is. How did you get where you are today after being the kid that would draw like continuously?
Yeah, I was very fortunate, right at about 1990, towards the end of the 80s. The Macintosh computer started to become a thing where it was becoming more affordable and people were starting to have them. I was introduced to a Mac. Mine was a Mac Plus. It had an 8-inch black and white screen about this big. It had no internal hard drive. It had a floppy disk on the front, so you couldn't work on any files that were bigger than 1.5 megabytes.
Right.
And no internet connection, but I loved it. And Adobe had just come out with Adobe Type Manager, which meant you could actually see the fonts on the screen. Before that, you had to work with the typesetter to do all that. And so it was kind of like really at the beginning of what was available for using, computer generated art. So I was very involved in theater productions at my school. I was very involved in my youth group growing up in my church. And so like, even though I wasn't good at a lot of things, anyone that was in leadership in either of those positions, whether it was a teacher or the school or the theater director, they would always contact me and go, okay, here's going to be the spring play. We need posters, we need cast shirts, and all that stuff. So I just started like really kind of using the computer and a lot of it, I would draw my illustration first, and then I would go to Kinko's and rent the computer there for long enough to be able to scan the file and use their scanner, download it onto a floppy, get it home. Started working with a local screen printer to create the t-shirts, and then she was like, look, I can show you how to create these files so that when I get them, I can actually use them. I had no idea what I was doing. And so she trained me basically how to set files up for that. I learned from her to the point where she would start sending me business. So like she had a ton of the local soccer camps and stuff like that. So when I'm in high school, she's basically like, say, I got $100. Do you want to design a soccer t-shirt? I'm like, $100? That seemed like $1 million. Yeah. So when I got out of high school, I had a portfolio of all the theater t-shirts I had done, the posters, several soccer camps that I had worked on, some things like that. And I saw an ad in the local newspaper for a position open at a local t-shirt retailer, and I went in and presented my work, and I ended up landing the job there. So that's basically how I started my career. I don't have any formal education at all. I went to a year and a half at Columbus State thinking I might at some point, but my career really started there. That led to me, working on creating the catalog for the company, and then learning, back in Cork Express, and then learning how to set up a photo shoot, and so it just built on that, and worked it for interactive agencies, video and film companies. Just had opportunities to kind of dip my toes into all sorts of different things. And that's kind of how I got started. Yeah.
Did you find that you essentially created your own path here, or did things just kind of happen like based on fate and things like that?
Boy, that's a great question. It's funny because I actually thought that things were going to go in a very different direction. And then things would come in and they would kind of like intersect and say like, okay, stop, hold on. I want you to think about this other possibility. When I was working for that t-shirt company, I had been accepted to go to college at what was then called the School of Advertising Art. Now it's called the Modern College of Design in Kettering, Ohio.
Yes.
And was super excited. I literally had moved all my stuff to Dayton. We didn't have much money growing up. I was basically having to pay for college myself. And so while we were out there on a visit one time, we stopped at a local church and we popped in and said, hey, do you know if there's any families or anybody that happens to have a room to rent or let my kid use during the week for free? And immediately that day, a young couple they had just gotten married said, we have this townhome. Someone did this for us when we were in college. And so we've got a spare room. You're welcome to use it for free. And I was like, well, It's clear this is where I'm supposed to go.
Yes.
I literally moved all my stuff in, had my dorm room all set up. And then my boss had that conversation with me and he's like, listen, I don't want to tell you what, God's plan is for your life or any of that. Like I'm just telling you that with what you've learned this summer, you're going to be that kid that ends up teaching everybody else. And so I met with a couple local illustrators and designers I trusted, and I was like, here's my situation. What do you think? And all of them basically was like, yeah, take a year off, see what happens. You can always go back to college next year. And so I felt really bad. I contacted that couple and I was like, I feel bad because I know you said that I could stay in your place. Well, it was really quiet on the other side of the phone and the woman started crying and I was like, I'm sorry, like what's going on? She's like, actually, it's really interesting because my husband and I just found out we were pregnant and we needed that room and we didn't know how to let you know that. Yeah. And so that we've been stressing. Like, how are we going to bring a baby into this house now that we need that room? And how do we tell him? Cause he's planning on going to college in the fall here. And it was like, to me, that was just like a sign, you know?
Yes, that is.
Yeah. Like I wanted you to go this way. I did whatever I needed to move that way. But then it was like, okay, actually I want you over here.
Yeah. Change your
And
plans.
so like, yep. And it was great. It worked out great. So yeah, I feel like that's how my life has been. It's just like if a door opens, walk through it. If a door closes, look for another door. And so I've never had a 5-year plan for my business. I've just always just said, what's next? I've been very fortunate in that I've never had to really look for work. I've been very busy for the last 13 years on word of mouth, referrals. And so I've just been really blessed as far as that goes. I don't ever have any goals to meet certain milestones every year, make a certain amount of money. I have personal goals where I'm trying to how do I, for instance, just make this thing that I hate doing a lot more efficient so that I can do the kind of stuff that I'm best at? Or how do I find that outside resource to handle that now? Because it's the thing I hate. It's like the bane of my existence, running my business. So okay, let's find that person, whether it's an attorney or whether it's, an accountant or whatever it happens to be, bookkeeper to handle a lot of that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I will say just from knowing you, and I will tell the audience that you are incredibly gifted and I think can kind of, just kind of fall off the cliff, if you will, and you're going to have a soft landing somewhere just because, I just think you're just that talented. I will.
Well, thank you.
I will tell the world that right now. But I do think that, to a certain degree, it is a little calculated whether you know it or not, because you tend to constantly challenge yourself, I think, with things too. you would not have written, illustrated and the children's book thing had you not thought, I'm going to just go ahead and kind of push my own limit here. You were talking to me, before we even started recording about how you are developing this relationship with Adobe. I mean, people just don't get that sort of thing that doesn't just fall on them. I mean, to a certain degree, I think you are, blessed and lucky to have those things happen. But I think it is due to your own desire to just kind of reach a little further and challenge yourself. And you can say I'm completely wrong here, but
No, you're not.
I think there is a certain,
think,
I think maybe you could be perfectly happy just designing things, but I do also see you reinventing yourself all the time too, and innovating and thinking logically and developing new ideas and really exercising that left side of your brain in order to get to your next level.
Well, and with the children's book specifically, like I just had always wanted to do a children's book. I always struggled with reading growing up, but I love the pictures, and I remember all the pictures in the books my mom read to me, and it's something I always wanted to do. And then my friend Beth just basically contacted me. It's like, I have a children's book. Would you illustrate it? And I'm like, sure. And she's like, I got no money. We're going to put it on Kickstarter and we're going to see what happens. And I'm like,
That's right.
Sounds good to me. So that to me though, like I knew I wanted to do a children's book at some point. But it was always kind of sitting in the back of my head. And then Beth came along and she's like, let's do this. So yeah, I did have to make a decision that I was going to that I was going to do this, even though I had paying work, like I was going to do this as well. The thing that I like to do whenever I have whether it's a pro bono job or like a side project type of thing like that, is use it as a challenge to uncover something I don't know. And so, for instance, with Adobe Illustrator, I've always loved when people use Illustrator brushes, and it's really unused. Most people use brushes in Procreate, they use them in Photoshop and stuff like that, but it's honestly one of those things that in Illustrator is very overlooked. And I wanted to have kind of that analog feel that vectors don't typically have. They're really like crisp and sharp. So I really challenged myself to say, all right, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to master this whole concept of making my own art brushes, learning how to use them. And I'll tell you, like, while I might eventually make back the money that I invested, for the time in those books. But what's really come from it is that during that Kickstarter campaign, I offered at I think it was the $100 level, would do like a 3-hour workshop on everything I learned on how to create brushes.
Yes.
And that I'm an overachiever on stuff. So like I probably spent 5 days putting together that curriculum for a one-time 3-hour course. And when it was done, I got such great reviews. Like everybody loved it so much. And they're like, man, that's amazing. And a couple people were like, you ought to just offer this as a course. And I was like, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So now I've given that at multiple conferences. I'm slated to give it at 2 conferences this year.
Oh my goodness. And
then the other thing that's cool about that is the illustrations I create on the side. So like last summer was super slow, very slow business wise. I know a lot of creative people had a rougher summer last year. And I was at the zoo with my kids and we were looking at the monkeys. I love the monkeys at the zoo. I love animals in general. And so I decided I'm going to illustrate these animals, and I'm going to really even push deeper into the Illustrator brush idea. And I started posting on Instagram. Well, then I get an email from Adobe and they're like, we've been doing a lot of research on people that are creating their own brushes. We've narrowed it down to we've tested yours. We think yours are like the best we've seen. And we want to hire you to do another animal illustration, and we want you to create your own unique brush set just for that. And then we're going to do a tutorial, and we're going to give the brushes away for free. So if you actually are looking for a nice set of Adobe Illustrator brushes for free, I can send you the link for that, and we can put it in the show notes. Or if you just look on Behance, if you look up Adobe Jeremy Slagle brushes, there's a free link. You can download them and have them for free, and it gives you the working file that I use to create the illustration, so you can kind of pick it apart and see how I did it. And so great opportunity. And then next week, which I'm super nervous about, I'm going to be doing a 3-day Adobe boot camp on how I use brushes in illustration. And one of those is actually going to be taking a spread from the children's book that I did and like, okay, how would I approach this? What did I learn? So I'm doing 1 day on how to illustrate plants in Illustrator, some really cool techniques and stuff I've learned. A lot of it's stuff I developed while working with Scott's company on some of their projects a couple years ago. And then I'm going to do a whole series on animals, which I love animals, how I illustrate animals using Adobe brushes and stuff. And then the third day is going to be how I approached creating that children's book illustration. So it should be fun. I'm terrified. We'll see how it goes.
That's exciting. That is so exciting.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I think, you have just, explained the whole concept around, this podcast, which is, again, you could have lived very happily, I'm sure, just with the drawing and the things like that, but that's really not you. You got the whole thing going. It's like, how do I, how do I put together this class? How do I, do this presentation? How do I do this? And it is all just elevated. I mean, everything that you've done up until now, and it's really quite amazing. And I have to ask, what would you tell? How do you think that kid that was drawing in the doctor's office would feel about what you've kind of pulled off here?
Oh, I would be ecstatic. Like everything about my life, like not just the ability to make a living doing what I do, but to have like a super supportive wife who, I mean, I failed to mention her earlier, but like I couldn't be running my own business without her. She also is very left-brained, and she helps with the making sure our taxes are good and that I'm not in jail because of that. She makes sure that, she follows up with overdue invoices and does that in a very kind way. And then, to be able to be blessed to have 2 kids that are kind of following in my footsteps. I love, like, sometimes you'll walk into like Stoff's or Olentangy River Brewing Company and you'll see us all sitting around the table working on projects together. And that's like super fulfilling for me. And like being able to bring them to creative conferences. We've all gone to Creative South a couple times. I'm speaking at Creative South this year, and I'm also giving my brush workshop at that on the workshop day. So if you're interested in taking my brush workshop, there's an opportunity. I'm also doing the same thing at Circles Conference in September. I'm about to announce that I'm going to do an online workshop coming up here, hopefully in April. So
send me all the links, because I know
I will.
I want to know all of this stuff.
I will.
And
So yeah, I mean,
here's something I want to plant in your brain too, because I when you were talking about, you're lucky to have your kids, I think in a way they're lucky to have you too, to have parents that really understand how they function. And I see more often than not, people being discouraged from being creative because their parents just don't get it. And there could be some blog in there somewhere for you just to write about, so your kids are creative. Here's what you can do to encourage them, and don't be afraid for them, because this is actually a good thing. They can make a living at this. They can do, and just kind of walk, talk some of that fear out of some parents that might have this, or discourage them. Because I remember even in college where people would say, I'm getting a business degree, even though they were great artists, because their parents would not pay for them to get an art degree, because they're not going to, they couldn't even support that as an idea. Yeah. And I still see that today. So they're if people aren't listening to this now, there might be, something to kind of get more out there. I'm trying to get that message out there more, that, and to have artists be paid what they're worth, because that's one of the big battles that Portfolio Creative still has sometimes too, where this is a job for people, and you're not asking to do it for free or for a discount or things like that. This is
absolutely I'll tell you, we giving your kids room and the tools for creativity is the most important thing you can do. We homeschooled my wife homeschooled our kids until they were in 8th grade. So oftentimes they were done with school by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, sometimes noon, and they had the rest of the day to do whatever they wanted. And our rule in our family was, if it's a creative tool, you need a new sketchbook, you need markers, like we'll go to Blix, we'll go to Hobby Lobby, wherever it needs to be.
Yep.
We'll buy you whatever you want. My daughter is really into like making these stuffed animals, and she creates these
Oh
really
my God, yes.
super
I've seen her
cute
work.
little things, and she does it. She still does it. If you see her in class in college, she's listening to the lecture and she's sitting there making something at the same time. So I would encourage you to do that. And Caleb's going to laugh about this, but our rule growing up was you get 30 minutes of screen time a day. So, you have to use it. You want to watch a movie, you've got 4 days. You're going to have to like,
Blanket?
you can watch 30 minutes tonight. You can watch 30 minutes
Oh,
tomorrow
they
night.
spit it out. Okay.
Oh yeah. No, obviously, if we would do, obviously there would be like, hey, we're gonna do family movie night this weekend, and we would watch a whole movie together, or we would go to the theater and see a movie. But on a normal day, it was 30 minutes of screen time, and that meant if you want to play the Nintendo, that's fine. You got 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think we don't give our kids opportunities to be bored anymore. They've got a device in front of them that's got a universe full of information and games and movies and all that stuff, and we don't give kids the time to be bored, and then we don't fill that boredom with something for them to actually do something with it. So I think that's
a great
probably the
lesson to
biggest
add on to
thing.
this too, because yeah, to your point, I mean that screen time, if they're on it for an hour, that could have been like an hour they could have been creating something, and
Right. Right.
and that's what we did growing up, because both you were telling a story about the Mac and all that. I was not on in front of a screen for hours, because I was drawing and doing other things, creating adventures with my brothers and things
Yeah.
like that. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
we got to kind of recapture that for sure.
Yeah, time to have an imagination, right? And time to make up games. Like, why would we why would we tell kids these are games that you can play, when you could say, I think we need to make up a game
You can
about
make
this.
a
Let's
game.
let's
Yeah.
yeah, let's do that. Like, kids used to do that with sticks and hoops,
I
like,
know. It's crazy.
and I think, I know may sound like an old fart when I say that, but it's like, I have a full wood shop in my basement, and we went and bought a Glowforge when it was on Kickstarter, which is like a really cool like desktop laser cutter. And
Oh,
and
wow.
so Caleb learned Adobe Illustrator really young, because you can create vectors in Illustrator and then export them and use them on the Glowforge. So
Yep. Yep.
that, like, all that stuff, like, and even like when I say screen time, if they wanted to watch an educational video, or watch like a Skillshare on how to do something creative, that there was no limit to that. You want to watch something that's going to be educational, you want to get on, use Adobe Illustrator or use Procreate on your iPad and draw and color, no limit to that as far as time goes. So,
Yeah.
it was really just like, how can I learn? How can I take things in? And so, yeah.
Well, Jeremy, I'd clearly talk about this like for another hour.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Don't get me started, Catherine.
So I'm just going to kind of wrap this up by essentially saying, what I think you have perfectly illustrated on that, how using your whole brain can really, deliver some success for you. Or if, like I said, at minimum, put you in a place where you are, creating and growing, and if along the way it's profitable too, that's great. Or you can make your own company from this, which is what you've done. All of that needs to be encouraged, and you can use certain tools from your innovative side, which again is that creative side, to reinvent yourself over and over and over again, which you have definitely done. I mean, like I said, I'm always looking forward to seeing what you're going to do next. And like I said, this Adobe relationship, we're just at the beginning of this. So, I mean, what are we going to be doing? Like, and I know you're not going to think 5 years ahead, but that's what I do. I'm thinking 5 years ahead for Jeremy Slagle. And what's he going to be doing then?
Your guess is as good as mine.
It's going to be something awesome. I have absolutely no doubt. Thank you so much for doing this. Like I said, I think the world of you, and I tell people about you all the time, that you designed the logo for Portfolio Creative and many of the other ones that we see around town. And even beyond that, really, and we're not going to limit to that. I've just seen your work everywhere, and I own some of your work, some of your prints that you've done, and I encourage people to check out your website, which again we will include, because you do sell things as well, rightfully so, because it's awesome stuff. And thank you again just so much. I really, really appreciate this.
Of course. Anytime. Have me back. I'd love to
I'm
talk
going to
more
have you
about
back, and we're going to talk about what
Great.
we're up to next.
Yeah, pick a topic. Let's go.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. This was really, really fun.
Thanks for the opportunity.